early gods were people. Something strange started to happen. The human spacecraft stopped responding in a world where the stars had been silent for longer than any empire. Not because of failure, not because I'm afraid. Just, they ceased to pay attention. This was once thought to be a navigation mistake in the controlled chaos of galactic civilizations. Then, as conceit, it wasn't until much later that they realized what had truly transpired. Mankind had decided to sit at a table that no one else knew about and vanish from everyone else's table. Humans were viewed as a curiosity, an experimental species, or as labor that might be used for ages. They were publicly humiliated, undervalued, secretly coveted, and spied on. However, someone or something ended this game. And now, as alien councils attempt to comprehend the absence, portals close, supplies run low, and whispers begin to form. The moons are armed, Earth has been locked, and their eyes have turned far away to anything that predates the observable cosmos by a great deal. A nameless human outpost slowly rotated on its axis near the border of the Daryon Dead Zone, where even gravitational waves vanished into the emptiness. Veyra Lorne was hiding, or rather, getting ready there. She moved through the semi-organic building's twisting hallways nude. Her cautious, methodical steps were not the result of insecurity. It was almost as though the station's own sensors were avoiding her. The mesmerizing patterns formed by the reflections of the violet light from space on her translucent skin. Whispers were no longer an option. The next step would be a restart rather than diplomacy. A deep, nearly echoing voice behind her replied, "Everything is ready." It was the Ordo von Tari Cell's tactical strategist, Derek Solon, the sole male survivor of Project V's partial transcendence protocols. She didn't answer right away. Her gaze remained focused on the display floating in midair, where holographic representations of extraterrestrial societies gradually faded into red-coded lines. In less than 28 hours, 3 areas lost access to trade channels. He claimed they are unable to comprehend. Not quite yet. They never understood, Veyra said softly as she put a finger to the hologram, because they never knew what we are. The air between them appeared to warm as Solon drew closer. Although there were no overt signs of intimacy, the way he and she gazed at each other and the space between them spoke volumes. The electric tension resembled the boundary between impact and touch. "Do you really wish to turn on the rail protocol?" he inquired. "It has nothing to do with my desires. It concerns what we have concealed for far too long." 12 Silex-class spacecrafts stood in a pyramidal arrangement outside the station. There were components in each of them that were absent from the official documents. They appeared to have been produced without regard to time, science, or oversight. And they were going out. In the furthest reaches of the cosmos, the Zentari Confederation was documenting unexplained malfunctions in human satellite broadcasts. The fact that the replies were coming, however, was more odd than the quiet itself. Just from somewhere else. From a different location. Veyra put on her tactical suit inside the gravity conversion chamber. The cloth covered her body in soft waves of black energy, adjusting to her shape with a fluidity that was almost pleasurable. Her eyes glowed golden as the mask fit over her face. And when he saw her, Derek briefly lost sight of the fact that the conflict had just begun. They looked for us as a species. They will discover us as something they are unable to identify. The ships left after that. Suddenly, without illumination, not a record, an archaeological item unearthed in Frontier D17 found only a hint of old energy. One word, written in a language that has since been lost, flashed on the artifact: reclaim. Block 2. Lieutenant Kyria Thale turned on the brain link aboard the Aloria Vale, one of the 12 Silex vessels, while the artificial pulse of the ship sounded like a heartbeat. The inside was absolutely alive, with tissues of unknown origin. The hull was created through biotechnological symbiosis and responded to speech, touch, and, more importantly, desire. As Kyria laid down in the connecting capsule, a little tremor ran down her spine as the system absorbed her skin. She shut her eyes. Her body gave up. However, she experienced something more personal and primordial than either agony or pleasure. The spacecraft seemed to be reaching parts of her psyche that no other person had ever been able to reach. Distracted, Derek watched the readings in the command center, but the image of Veyra Lorne kept coming back to him. The manner in which she talked, moved, and went silent. In addition to being a leader, she was a rift in time that didn't quite fit into humanity's known past. It was unclear to him if his desire for her was motivated by fear, passion, or an unexplained yearning to lose oneself in her. The spacecraft entered the Rax Zero zone in the outer sector, which is off-limits to practically all interplanetary powers. It was officially regarded as unstable. In reality, it served as a cemetery for patrols and investigations that never came back. But as though they already knew the road, the human fleet marched forward with determination. Veyra emerged silently on the bridge, her clothing emanating a faint aura that throbbed in ominous hues. They all stared at her for a time, not out of deference, but out of instinct. She commanded by presence rather than hierarchy. A sphere of liquid memory hovered beside her, containing bits and pieces of secret information from the Reclaim program. Threshold reading, Kyria? Veyra inquired. 11 degrees over the threshold for transition. The curvature is steady, though. The facts remain true. Still, Veyra whispered. The dimensional distortion projectors were carefully tuned in the arming chamber. With quivering hands, Lean Morvek, the head engineer, adjusted the fields not in fear, but in expectation. She was aware that what they were about to accomplish was a return, not only a plan, not to a location, but to something that's within of them. Cut the cosmic arteries that fed the old oppressors with absence, not violence. Was the official mission's straightforward goal. Take their flow, become irreplaceable and invisible. However, there was more, something that not many people there fully comprehended. Not even Derek, who was present in the secret conferences with Veyra. She laid down on the artificial floor of her quarters so the system could examine her cellular makeup. Slowly, long-forgotten remnants of human ancestry that predate written history began to come back to life as fragments of ancient DNA, slowly, steadily, as if in a whispered dance. Between time and flesh, she felt the heat rising on her skin. The AI of the ship spoke softly, 87% reconnection. Discovered extra historical patterns. Proceed, she muttered. You're evolving. She grinned, a grin devoid of sweetness. Without arrogance, just consciousness. Kyria had the same sensation in the neurological chamber. Her entire body shook, slightly. She appeared in unreal settings in the pictures that the ship were maybe her own imagination project. She recognized faces even if she didn't know them. Among them, Veyra. Not as it was today, though. Older or younger. Hard to say. There was a conversation taking place, an echo. With a nearly shattered voice, she shouted out, Derek, I'm paying attention. I noticed. Something caught my eye, as though she were within me. We are aware. What is known? She is more than simply a person. Not you. Not me, either. There was silence on the bridge. An unseen energy field then burst in front of the ships. As they passed above the Rax Zero zone's horizon, it wasn't a weapon. It was a seal. An antiquated barrier that shielded something that ought to be extinct. However, it did exist. They also held the key dot as they were their own descendants. Block 3. There was no sound when the field was traversed. No light was present. There was no conventional reading that suggested the fleet had shifted. However, every person in the room was aware that they were now at a different location because of their bodies and blood, or at a later date, or both. The area in front of them was pitch black. Lack of reference. Not a lack of stars, a thick emptiness teeming with unseen presence. A low-frequency pulse was the first reading that the Silex ships recorded. Then a word not said, not read felt. Complaint authorized. There was complete quiet from the Eloria Vale's AI. With no apparent order, the whole fleet sensed. A metallic cold went up Derek's neck. In the neurological room, Kyria collapsed to her knees. No one heard Lean Morvik scream. Veyra Lorne stood in the middle of the bridge, her skin burning and her eyes wide open. The recollections arrived as feelings rather than pictures. Bits and pieces of anything hidden in a layer that is beyond recollection. She viewed herself as a principle, a fractured thing that was now reconstructing itself, rather than as a woman. She was a person. She was more, though. The others were also aware. "She's waking up," Lean murmured, breathing heavily and his eyes ablaze. "No. We are," Derek said, gazing at the ship's increasing curvature. Structures started to rise out of the shadows around the fleet. Massive, rusted metal colossi composed of unidentified materials, some of which had architecture that defied symmetry and logic. They served as sentinels, not as ruins, dormant for thousands of years, awaiting a single indication of a comeback. The human ships were still perfectly formed. They were linked, not because they were disciplined. Every crew member had fleeting flashbacks, including feelings from life other than their own and memories of times they never experienced. And Veyra appeared in each of them, sometimes as a warrior, sometimes as a leader, and other times like a goddess. The tactical suit was taken off by Veyra in the bioreconnection room, not for physical reasons, but because polymer filters could not reach what he was going to access. The density of the air surrounding him changed. Like stardust, particles drifted about her skin. Her fingers shook from too much intensity, not from weakness. Derek went in without requesting authorization. That was no longer necessary. "Are you not opening the gate?" It was never shut down. "It's us who have forgotten how to go in." Their gazes were blazing. He walked closer till he could feel her breath warming him. Veyra didn't retreat. He didn't move forward either. Something between them was more straightforward than desire and older than the flesh. It was an innate yearning to be aware of their identity, to see oneself in someone else, and the galaxy as a whole. He whispered, "When you look back, you'll see that you created civilizations based on forgetting. However, the touch was soft but heartbreaking as she placed her forehead against his, to get back what we left behind. We came." Across the fleet came a golden pulse. The readout was the same for all the Silex ships. A fissure had opened up ahead. There was no wormhole, no fold. It was a temporal membrane, a closed barrier that could only identify certain types of blood. Veyra Lorne went by herself into the activation room. All around her, holograms glowed with symbols that no contemporary eye could comprehend. However, she recognized them, not since she had researched them, but he did remember them. The colossi outside gradually awoke, lighting eyes that had been vacant for thousands of years. Not one of them threatened. They bowed, like they were welcoming an old creator or a successor. Veyra held out her palms and spoke forgotten phrases to recognize the time, not to ignite anything. "We return." The fire continued to burn. The gap widened, not in a blast, but in complete quiet. And a planet on the other side, not a colony, not a base, a whole planet, cloaked in transparent blackness. A planet that didn't exist in any system, legend, or map. But when they saw it, everyone present recognized it. Kyria collapsed on her knees, crying incomprehensibly. Lean laughed apprehensively. Chairs began to fall as Derek closed his eyes. Veyra simply grinned. "Our real home. Before to Earth, prior to everything. The place where the first person set foot. Block 4. The planet in front of us didn't rotate. There were no natural satellites for it. It didn't give out any heat. However, it pulsed in some way, like a heart buried behind kilometers of silicon and old metal. It beat slowly, although its surface was dark. It was alive because man-made and natural structures blended together to form an indistinguishable whole, like the ribs of a buried colossus. Curved skyscrapers protruded into the emptiness, like a beacon for those who dared to remember. A spiral of golden light gently rotated in the middle. As if beckoned by a genetic yearning, Veyra led the fleet, her spacecraft falling without orders. Without hesitation, the others followed. They encountered no opposition from the planet's atmosphere. There was no alert. There was no defense. All that was heard was a faint vibration, as though the planet itself were communicating. You took your time. On the outside, Kyria felt her legs give way as she stepped out of the Eloria veil. Although thick, the air was not poisonous. Its density was sensuous, as though it touched the private areas of mind and entered the pores. She felt her own body, reacting, but she was unable to explain it. Her chest heaved as though she had been sprinting, and the heat raced up her thighs. Her eyes welled up with uncontrollable tears, and her fingers shook. "The earth, he knows us," he whispered. For his part, Derek's demeanor was reserved as he peered about. It was more personal than the previous time he had experienced this, which was during the Project V Contact Relics trials, not as scientific. His footsteps on the ground seemed to be recognized by an unseen force. As though he were a part of the earth itself, Veyra, too, she didn't move. She moved with ease. Every move she took seemed to create new avenues. As they approached, the latent structures glowed, exposing pieces of a symbiotic architecture that mimicked the human body but not the body as it exists now, but rather as it was imagined by long-forgotten gods. They encountered what seemed to be a temple as they entered, the spiraling center. However, religion was non-existent there. Memory existed. There were echoes on the walls instead of writing. Every wall sent pictures straight into the mind when it was touched. Furthermore, they were total feelings rather than only pictures. Smells, textures, feelings, bits and pieces of a life everyone appeared to have had and left behind. Veyra made contact with a pillar and looked in front of a liquid mirror. It wasn't her reflection, though. It belonged to another woman. Features combined from extinct races, eyes of pure light, skin as black as polished coal. The person grinned. Veyra experienced warmth, a familiar, age-old warmth that surged through her body and burst into chills. "Remember?" the figure said. Veyra said, "I remember what I didn't live," sighing. Through the mirror, the reflection stretched out and touched her. It was a soft, crushing blow. Her body bowed, her fingers clutching her own arms as though to hold an escaping power, and her breath grew labored. She didn't fight back, though. She opened her mind to the recollection. Sweating, Kyria collapsed to his knees in the nearby hallways. Panting, Lean rested against a wall. Derek moved away from the gathering, fighting the images with clenched fists. They all saw various things. A former self, not reincarnations. However, pieces slowly, the reality set in. Mankind was nothing new. It was too old to be quantified. So old that in order to exist, she had learned to forget herself. Veyra dropped to her knees on the floor. However, there was something unique about her face. She didn't feel afraid, not perplexed. "I felt content, she said. "It's here. That's where it all started." "This is..." Derek came closer, still gasping. "The source, no." Her golden eyes glistened as she gazed at him. "It is the remnant of our previous attempt to become gods. Quiet. A quiet that resulted from an inability to completely comprehend rather than from a lack of sound. Everybody was engrossed, flooded with violent and sensual pictures. Wars waged in the mind. Vital vitality locked in love. Births among dead stars in zero gravity. Silently, Kyria sobbed, her face shining and drenched in perspiration. Lean embraced her knees while simultaneously sobbing and giggling. With a shudder, Derek gazed at Veyra as though he saw a divinity and a woman simultaneously, wanting both without knowing which would ruin him first. Veyra then touched the center, spiral, and spoke the following. "We will not return to war. We come back to recall our past selves." In response, the planet created a whirlpool of light. The last inscription gleamed in the spiral, both in color and voice. "You are not the children of the earth. You were the reason the earth originated." Block 5. The first wave of energy left the planet's core as Veyra Lorne executed the spiral temple's last directives. It was undetectable to conventional sensors, but disastrous to any artificial system that relied on gravitational symmetry. Satellites orbiting nearby worlds stopped working. In far-off colonies, navigation codes were tampered with. The word that the Raxos sector's blind area had illuminated for the first time. in 4,000 cycles traveled through unauthorized channels in less than 27 minutes. The High Circle called an emergency meeting at the Citadel of Egron, the headquarters of the Zentari Federation. It was due to the nature of the signal, not the human fleet, whose traces had been non-existent until that point. The eldest advisor recognized the unexplained pattern. With a chill as the core hologram spiraled and repeated it, "This code precedes the cycle of Zentari unity." "That isn't feasible," the security minister stated. With unwavering gaze, Archivist Shoradal said, "With humans, nothing is impossible." Emperor Veyra Lorne, a flesh-bound circuit hybrid at the center of the Kalis Empire, watched the simulation with uncommon curiosity. He rose slowly and gestured to cut the projection, surrounded by advisors who spoke too much and thought too little. "You're still not getting it. A weapon is not what this is. It's a declaration." "What are you saying?" a scientist inquired. "That we weren't pioneers. And maybe not even the people who own the things we've constructed." The news also reached the crystalline creatures known as the Kashith, who used color and vibration to communicate. Their communication towers glowed with veneration and horror. They exchanged a brief message with one another. The people who opened the first fold said, "The walkers have returned." But the attitude was different at the heart of the Galactic Council. A haughty denial. Senator Varkash stated, "The humans are destroying themselves in silence. They vanished 2 cycles ago. After that, describe how your freighters were lost while traversing the Raxo area." Coincidence? Counselor Ilno, however, who belonged to a species whose genetic memory dated back to liquid living forms only, murmured this while closing his eyes. "We are the ones who have been lost since the day. We must judge them, not them." Veyra triggered the return core back on the secret planet summoned by Netherian's lost records. A floating orb spinning at quantum speeds was revealed. As the structure opened like a mechanical flower, inside, the reflection of old human features was duplicated, fused, and in states of energy, they were echoes, not persons. Yet they gave off a sensation of witness. "Are they pieces?" Derek inquired. "They are legacies," she retorted. "We scattered parts of ourselves to survive." The translucent veil that encased Kyria in the center of the room left her naked, in the shadow of the lights, not for physical exposure, but for emotional surrender. The connection with the planet had overtaken her, bringing back memories of a time before words. And in each of these visions, there were touches, ancient, unspoken, passionate touches that sought not pleasure, but completeness, she moaned. "Softly, she is remembering," Lean stated tearfully. Veyra said, "She's turning into one of the Guardians." The planet not only existed off the maps, but it also distorted them. Research groups on the outskirts of the sector started to lose contact with satellites. Fold portals began to flicker, and a new pulse was sent out from the center of Netherian. This time in the form of a call, nor a request, nor a threat. A call. Dispersed among deserted colonies, defunct worlds, and abandoned stations, the people started to absorb the message in their genes, not through waves or writing. They just knew. They started changing their paths one by one, diverting, giving up its purposes, and connecting to the call of origin. Derek's chest heaved as he leaned against the wall of Netherian's temple. "They will not accept that this will become a war," Veyra stated. "We are restoring true order, not requesting acceptance. And if we are attacked, they'll strike." When she turned around, her eyes were black, and for the first time since the planet had been ignited, they were not shining. Humans. Full, royal. But now, before we forget that we are gods, they will confront who we really are. Block 6. The first to move was the Loriax Confederation, which, following the signals from Netherian, sent out a reconnaissance flotilla led by Arkal Maev, a calculating and icy strategist who had a reputation for putting down insurgencies before they could start. The plan was straightforward. Map, identify, intimidate, as they always did. Sensors triggered. Shields prepared, emergency procedures loaded. The flotilla of 12 heavy-class ships emerged in regular formation from the hypervortex on the outskirts of Nytherion. However, nothing answered. There were only the Earth, no satellites, no indications of a human fleet, no alarms. The stillness seemed odd to Maev, so he made the decision to continue. He said, "Send the planetary scanning drone." The tactical officer nervously answered, "Commander," adding, "The drone has vanished." "What are you seeing?" Literally. The stream was stopped as soon as it made contact with the environment. There was no resistance, no data, nothing. The planet with the dark surface on the bridge screen was still, untouchable, and oddly attentive. Maev's eyes narrowed. To find out whether there are any subterranean buildings, I want to start a density variation scan. Sweating, the intelligence officer remarked, "Commander, I'm picking up something, but I'm having trouble processing it. Make it visible on the screen." The center of the bridge was where the holographic picture projected itself. No system recognized it. No code interpreted it. But everyone in the room felt it as if something had touched their spine from within. It was a sign, a single circular stroke with 7 lines crossing at unimaginable angles. Someone murmured, "What is this?" Maev gave the command, "Close the signal now." However, it was too late. In response, the sign sent a vibratory pulse through the ship hulls, not as an assault, but rather as a sweep, in a matter of seconds. The flotilla's engines, shields, and communication all shut down, and there was complete quiet. Then a transmission was initiated, delivered straight to Maev's consciousness. Neither in the common galactic language, nor in the Loryak's language. "This place is not yours. You look with eyes that do not know how to see. Go back to sleep." The other crew members yelled, and insane terror swept through the spacecraft, and then, as if stepping out of the very blackness of space, just one human ship emerged, and Maev collapsed to her knees, bleeding from her ears, not large, not menacing. Her hull vibrating like living substance, it emitted no light, no sound, no menace. And her profile was similar to the pre-classical prototypes of the expansion age. All she did was hover before the retired fleet and observed. Veyra saw the events via the mirror core in the Eloria Vale's command room, but he didn't rejoice or even grin. His words were, "They were warned," still looking pallid, Kyria questioned. "And if they return with more, they will then acquire knowledge in a different manner." Images of the Loryak's flotilla's destruction quickly went around the galaxy. And the same topic was being discussed in the war councils, market guilds, and clandestine forums. What was on Netherian? The humans, meantime, were silently assembling no longer as distinct colonies. However, as pieces of a whole that was at last coming into its own. Human fleets, formerly thought to be outdated, were no longer in the hangars. Whole stations were locked with cryptographies that none of the great powers recognized. And little units started to vanish from their postings in the central system. Additionally, portals that did not exist in records prior to the measurement of time were reactivated in the less visible areas where radars could no longer reach them. These portals were neither fold or hypervortex portals. Inside the spiral temple, Derek and Veyra saw the first one open, a circle of pure liquid energy that shimmered like flaming mercury. "Should we cross?" he inquired. "Not yet. The others must be activated first." "What is the number?" Veyra gazed at him. The color had gone from his eyes. 7. "Where are they, by the way?" "On worlds unaware that they are home to them." Derek let out a sigh as the mission's burden finally caught up with him. "And when do we turn them all on?" "The real narrative starts now." The Galactic Council was assembling its best strategists far away, and the directive was clear. Destroy Netherian before the myth materialized. They continued to believe they were up against insurgents. They had yet to comprehend. Block 7.Veyra saw the second portal's location in a dream, or in a piece of memory that surfaced during the central core's activation. An ancestral name, Avanshara, echoed in his mind. It wasn't a registered coordinate or a known planet, but his position was etched beneath his skin like an old genetic map. No code was shared, no strategy was discussed, and the fleet functioned as a single entity. Veyra, Kyria, Derek, Lean, and the others were not merely officers or soldiers. They were the stewards of what was left of something bigger, something that even the gods had forgotten. The Silex ships regrouped in an organic formation. The body started to respond throughout the journey to Avanshara. He saw or dreamed of scenes he couldn't categorize. Kyria's hands wandering over her own skin as if trying to recall, not of pleasure, but of tactile memory, as if touch were a language before speech. Kyria was the first to feel, her body arching during the ship's induced sleep, sweat trickling down her skin as if emerging from an inner ocean. "Veyra," he said, "in the dream, was it me? Or were you there, nude in the light?" But more than the eroticism of the visions, Derek felt a sense of recognition, not of carnal desire, but of lost completeness, a hunger for belonging that could be satisfied by fusion rather than by war. Derek was sweating coldly, alone in his meditation capsule, and he had visions of entwined bodies, of unspoken gestures, of physical unions that transcended gender or species. Veyra was awake and aware of everything in the command center. She was not only the ship's commander, she was a part of it, and the sensory field of the fleet echoed through her like a second nervous system, feeling the heat through Kyria's skin, the quick impulse of Derek, the sensual nervousness of Lean, and even the quiet restlessness of the ship itself, as if she were the heart and the womb all at once. As it should be. She whispered softly to the console, "Everyone is being touched." The scene was not what they had anticipated in the orbit of Avanshara, a suspended structure, resembling a bridge between atmospheres, a broken ring of carved crystal, floating in impossibility, and a translucent tower hundreds of meters tall, vibrating like an invisible harp, were the main features that attracted the most attention as the planet spun slowly. Surrounded by magnetic seas and dark forests, Veyra stated, "The portal is there, but it is not physical." Derek questioned, "How do we access it? With all that we own." Each step on the soil of Avanshara seemed to touch dormant memories. Plants moved gently in the wind, but there was no wind. Gravity wavered with thoughts, and, most importantly, the tower's presence evoked feelings. They descended in modified capsules, whose hulls responded to the vibrational tower's proximity. The tower pulsed in her field of vision, releasing sounds that sounded like long, low, indecipherable moans, but profoundly human. Kyria stumbled as she got closer to the center of the ring, and his knees gave way. She gasped, her body overcome by an uncontrollable excitement, her hands digging into the ground, her breath heavy. The same wave, which wasn't agony or joy, but rather physical ancestry. Something that echoed in the cells overcame Derek as he raced to her and touched her, falling beside her. Veyra did not back down when she saw them. For a while, everyone surrounding the tower went to their knees as he knelt between the two and pressed his forehead to the tower's base, his eyes dimming. The tower said something, not in audio, however, in feeling. "If you wish to bridge, keep in mind that touch comes before words. You carry the seed and the flaw, love and the fall, the flame and the forgetting." The bodies around Veyra followed the same pattern, each exposed to the other, not out of desire, but out of truth. And there, surrounded by spirals of living energy, they touched each other, in skin, in eyes, in presence. Without an act, but with everything. Veyra's clothing gradually turned into particles of light, not as an exhibitionist nudity, but as a ritual gesture. The gateway swung open. A translucent circle emerged from the middle of the tower, and as they crossed it, they saw not a different world, but rather a reflection of themselves, projected in shadow, light, and a voice that revealed everything they had concealed. In a life he had never experienced, Kyria found himself loving an unidentified lady with a warmth that made his body shiver. In his arms, Derek saw a kid, a child never born. Lean witnessed a war in which he won and lost. Veyra viewed herself as a piece of someone bigger, of someone who had existed before, of a human being with 1,000 faces and voices, all of which were hers. They went over. Additionally, the second point became active. A bridge was created between worlds that were no longer certain of their existence. Monitoring systems, warp gateways, and artificial intelligences started to malfunction everywhere in the cosmos, and the energy pulsed from Avanshara to Netherian, because reality's map was shifting.